I'm trying to work out if there is a path to victory for Scott Morrison. I mean, it's looking pretty grim, looking at the national polls. But take us through the battlefield seats in each state and tell us the lay of the land, starting with West Australia and South Australia, because there are a number of seats expected to fall there, but how many?
Yeah, that's the key question. Look, it's a pretty difficult path to Scott Morrison. I'll talk about the generalities in a moment, but let's start with WA. All the action here is in Perth, of course. I think when we start with Swan, if that doesn't fall to Labor, I'll be shocked, and I think the Labor Party would struggle to win given the sort of impetus they have here. So in Swan and Pearce, you have incumbents stepping down. Swan's the smaller margin. Pearce is an interesting one. The Liberal Party feels a bit better about that in recent weeks, and it feels as though WA overall is going better for them. So they're hoping they can hold the losses to 1. We'll see. Labor feels pretty good about 2. Hasluck's interesting. Both sides say Ken White's a good local member, but about 37,000 of voters in that seat have never been there before. They've been shifted into it. And that means he has to win over some new voters. It's not just incumbency. And then we get as well to Curtin. This is one of the so-called teal seats. Look, I'm not picking up there'll be a strong enough vote here to topple Celia Hammond from the Liberal Party, but it's one to watch nonetheless. When we get to Adelaide as well, I think we've just got one seat we're talking about. There was initial talk about Sturt. It's a bigger margin, and maybe some of that excitement came for Labor after that state election victory, but we're talking Boothby. It is a little bit of a shifting seat. It's one Labor's spoken about for a while, but the margin's gotten closer and closer. I think Labor's a pretty strong chance to pick it up. So you're looking, I think, at a likely 3 to the Labor Party if things go as expected in South Australia and Western Australia.
All right, so far we've got, let's say optimistically for the Liberals, just 2 seats lost in those states. Take us now to Tasmania and Victoria. Now, these have been 2 areas that the coalition's remained relatively confident in, but there was a bad poll for the Liberals in Melbourne today, in Goldstein and in Josh Frydenberg's seat, Kooyong. How are the Liberal hopes looking now?
I think they're shakier than they were. Tasmania, first of all, is interesting because this is seen as perhaps the state where Scott Morrison has the best personal standing. We've heard so much about him saying himself, the Prime Minister, he doesn't think he's popular. Tasmania seems to be a better area for whatever reason for him. But you can see here they're defending a couple of seats. So Bass, a very tight margin. Look, Bridget Archer seen as a pretty good candidate there. A decent chance to hang on still, but it's going to be very close. And Braddon similar. The thing about preferences here is the Jackie Lambie network is preferencing against the Liberal Party in Braddon and for them in Bass. So will that be a bit of a factor? I think they're both really tight, those seats. If I had to predict one would fall, I'd probably lean towards Braddon, but it's going to be tight. Lions, we were hearing a lot in the past few months. The Liberal Party felt good about that and the Labor Party vulnerable. They just feel like the campaign against Brian Mitchell might be running out of a bit of steam. So they're feeling better about holding that. What's the net impact there? Well, previously, maybe the Liberal Party thought they could defy the odds and win one. I think we're getting back towards neutral territory there and maybe Labor even pick one up. So Tasmania doesn't look as good as it was looking before. Victoria and Melbourne is interesting because this was the high watermark for Labor last time around. So could they improve the Liberal Party this time around? But it's looking tricky mainly because, as you mentioned, of those teal independents. Casey is seen as in play. I'd still be surprised if it were lost, but you've got an incumbent, Tony Smith, standing down, so worth a watch. Chisholm's been a coin toss each time. It's 0.5%. Look, we're going to see a lot of money and time invested in that. It's pretty hard to call. I think Labor is slightly ahead, but it's definitely not a seat that's gone. Goldstein, as you mentioned, a few months ago, nobody thought Zoe Daniel would win. Now she's gone into favouritism, and it's a tough campaign for Tim Wilson. And Kooyong, which you mentioned, the Treasurer, an astonishing amount of money spent here. You can't walk down the street without a call flute hitting you in the face, I think. And the feeling is Josh Frydenberg might even be slightly behind. You wouldn't give that up. Who knows what late factors there might be. Perhaps people thinking, hey, this guy could be the leader if the coalition is looking like it's headed for a loss. So you could get some funny things happen late, I think, in Kooyong. And Higgins, I think, is in play. Labor talking it up. Liberal Party did feel better about it, but if the latest national polls are right, you'd have to put that in a big question mark as well. On the Labor side, they're not defending as much because they're not defending to independence is probably the main reason. Labor feel better about Dunkley, that Peter Murphy will hold on there and she's it's steadied, if you like, from some initial concern. Corangamite is an interesting one, Andrew. We're talking outer suburban regional sort of areas, and McEwen's not on the map, but that's similar. Will this be the swing Scott Morrison needs, these types of voters coming back to him and concerned about things such as lockdowns or not? Corangamite, I think, is a really good litmus test. for that very theory.
Well, I'm going to say that's a net loss to the Liberals of 1, but actually to the Teals. But that really is optimistic, I think, on what you've just told us. The Liberals would have to campaign very, very well in the last week and a half. All right, that brings them to a total of 3 losses so far. Queensland. Looks like all of the action there is going to be in the southeast, in and around Brisbane. Take us through this.
Yeah, pretty much. I'm going to write off the north for now and assume there won't be seats to change hand. Leichhardt has a chance, but let's assume it won't happen. Liberal seats, first of all, that they're defending. Dixon will be a watch, but I don't think it'll fall. Longman, both sides feel as though that's inching into the Liberal column. None of these are guarantees, Andrew, but this is the indication of things. Brisbane seen as the best chance, and then to a slightly lesser degree, Ryan. Look, everyone you talk to in Queensland feels as though there's a swing generally for Labor, but in a lot of seats up north, it won't help them enough for a seat. I think the best chance by far for Labor is Brisbane, but I'm not calling them over the line. On the other side of the fence, again, I spoke about Corangamite, similar things being spoken about for Blair. Labor's adamant there is a swing going towards it in Blair. It's strong on that factor. The Liberal Party says it's putting money in there, that's its target. Maybe there's not much else to target. Lilly, in Queensland at least, because they've got a lot of seats already. Lilly, I don't think will go at all. Morton, similar confidence. Griffith, just a watch for the Greens there. But a lot of action. You never know. Queensland can surprise. I don't think a lot are going either way at the moment in Queensland.
It's very hard to call, Tom. But again, on your analysis, I'm going to say if it's another good week for or it's a good week for the Liberals, the last week, all right, let's say net zero change there. But, gee, a lot of things are going to have to go right. By far, then, I really think it's going to come down. I think you've been saying this for a while. New South Wales, this is going to be the big state. But, again, very different battlegrounds here, depending where you look. No one pattern. Take us through these.
Yeah, and some battlegrounds we wouldn't have spoken about not long ago. Let's start with Northern Beaches. This used to just be a sea of blue. Well, there's only a little bit of, well, it's purple here, but let's call it what it is. I guess it's teal. Warringah, they'll hold on to that. Zali Steggall will hold on to that. It's looking a bit better on the ground here for the Liberal Party. Mackellar they feel pretty good about. Wentworth they're feeling better and better about. North Sydney, there is a poll today suggesting Trent Zimmerman has a lead and that Kylie Tink's vote is disappointing on the downside. I still think it's a huge doubt seat, North Sydney, and they certainly won't get Warringah. The fact we're talking about this as a battleground is the problem for the Liberal Party, but I think this is just come back a little bit to them on a seat-by-seat basis at least. Hunter, this is a fascinating, again, region to talk about as a battleground. Are there sort of similarities to the Trump Rust Belt, to blue-collar workers that feel left behind? The last swing suggested things were happening. I think the problem right now is Labor can see the threat coming, and I'm not confident any of these seats go. Hunter, Patterson, Shortland. Hunter's the logical one. The Nationals running hard there, and you do have Joel Fitzgibbon stepping down. I think for now, both sides are just saying this is a bit of a reach and a hope for the government, rather than them actually getting seats. So both sides are conceding that. Then we get to Western Sydney. On the Liberal side, first of all, in Western Sydney seats, and we know these tend to sort of go with the flow. So there could be some surprises here. Reid, you could put down for Labor. Banks, I think, is in play and will be interesting, but I wouldn't want to call it going to Labor, and Lindsay will stay. On the flip side for Labor, they are fending off a little bit in Western Sydney themselves. Parramatta, the most interesting one. Both sides adamant they're in the better position here, so it's been an interesting one. Andrew Charlton was the parachuted-in candidate. I'm not thinking Greenway will move. Michelle Rowland is a pretty good local candidate and perhaps can see it coming after a swing last time. MacArthur won't shift, and Macquarie as well, 0.2%. A couple of others I'll mention. I think Bennelong is actually becoming an increasing chance to shift towards Labor, but Gilmore still seen as a strong chance of going to the Liberal Party. The difference here, Andrew, is I'm not talking about a lot of seats necessarily going, but they could easily go 3 to 4 either way if the mood in New South Wales becomes clear. Right now, it's perhaps not, but the biggest weapon Labor would have is that general nationwide poll suggesting that when we have these tight margins, while it's hard for them to defend some of the tight margins, it's going to be hard for the Liberal Party to get a swing towards it.
Now, Tom, taking all this, what you've said, right, if all the 50-50 contests that you're referring to do end up, and this is a big if, to the coalition, right, that they managed to hold on, I'm seeing at the best reading a loss of 4 seats away from the government, 2 of them to one of the Teal independents, which suggests to me hung parliament and Labor clinging to a minority government by the barest of margins. the barest of margins. This is probably about the worst result we could possibly get. But that depends on the Liberals doing extremely well between now and the end of the campaign. Tom Connell, thank you so much for that wonderful analysis. Appreciate it.
Great to chat.